Chapter 24. The ceiling R&D building didn't really stand out in the grand scheme of things. It was basically a two-story building that looked so plain that Naruto overlooked it virtually every time he passed it, even during his pranking days. Hiding in plain sight at its finest, he supposed. Naruto really didn't know what to expect going inside of it. But he certainly wasn't expecting to be caught in a rib-crushing hug. Much less by a tall woman with glasses and a scientist coat, her hair put up in a ponytail and her skin slightly tanned. This is weird, Naruto said, his head nestled within her bosom and his voice muffled. I don't think we've met, have we? Haha, I guess we haven't. The woman finally set him down, allowing him to breathe again, and then crouched down so that she was on eye level with him. My name is Naru Tsuda, I'm the head of the research team handling the masks left behind by your ancestors. It's a pleasure to meet you in person, Uzumaki-kun. Oh. He scratched the back of his neck, a slight blush on his cheeks. She had been soft. So I guess you're happy about that, huh? Giddy was a more accurate word, judging by how brightly she smiled. It's a really great project, and I was so lucky that the Hokage chose me for it. It's not every day someone gets to break down some of the oldest seals found right in our own village. The ciphers and the layers could take an entire lifetime to unravel. Well, as long as she's happy, Naruto thought. He wasn't sure what about that made her so enthusiastic. Seals were useful, but a lifetime to work out how a bunch of lines on paper did the things they did wasn't his specialty. The Hokage told me I could reclaim the rest of the beasts. Genbu, Kinja, and Seryu. She rose to her full height, towering over Naruto again. Follow me. I want to show you something first. He followed her through a sealed door and into a section of the building that was colder than you'd expect. It was a long corridor linked to different rooms, walked by a number of other people who wore similar coats and had badges pinned to their chests. They entered into one room that was separated by a glass panel from another, which had the masks within them. Now, Uzumaki-kun, tell me what you know about the sealing arts? She asked as she sat down at a computer. Mostly that if you write them down properly and put chakra into them, they do things like create a storage space, barriers, or explosions. That's true at their basic level, but they can do so much more than that. Naru brought the masks up on the computer screen, showing a smattering of different seals that looked like a jumbled mess. For example, your ancestors managed to apply several seals that aren't visible to the naked eye offhand to the back of the masks, which we're only able to observe now, thanks to the advances in technology. Note that this was around 100 years ago. When she hit a key, the masks peeled off on the screen like an onion. This revealed that the smattering of seals made more sense in 8 layers when they weren't overlaying one another. The view then sorted them into 2 rows, with the top right layer being the seals that he saw on the back that he was supposed to place his blood on. See? Naru pointed to them. From what we can gather, the application of blood to prove legacy and insertion of chakra unlocks the functions of the lower ones and activates them like a set of programs. The reason that they possess sapience is likely because of these lower layers acting as memory partitions and storing information to be used at a later date. And 8 layers is just the total number we found on the divine beasts, while the priests and priestess have over 30 at an estimate, and we're still working in determining many the others have. So that's why they remember us? He crossed his arms in thought. And they'd likely remember those that came before me and Karen-chan too, back when they were first made. Her ponytail bobbed as she nodded her head again. We don't understand more than 5% of the sealing arrays at best because your ancestors used a cipher in their work without a key or primer left behind. It's a travesty that such work has been left unexplored. And the legacy seal is vital to its functions because it's somehow interwoven throughout the layers in a way that would cause a cascading failure if we tried to remove it through normal means, so we can't ask them ourselves. I applaud the safeguards, but things like that make it so that great work is lost throughout history once they're gone. Is it really okay if I take them while you're doing this? He asked. We've got the seals on the divine beasts all registered on file, Naru said, rising from her seat. She then went through the door and picked up the remaining divine beast masks. Even if you get them destroyed by accident, we can copy the sealing work now to replace any masks that get damaged beyond use, but they won't retain any of the knowledge the old ones had. Naru handed them over. That being said, be careful. The masks can be replaced, but you and the other girl are the only 2 known Uzumaki left. It's bad enough that you're both active shinobi as is. Naruto frowned. What's bad about that? Even during times of peace, you can still catch a stray kunai and die, she pointed out, which wasn't exactly wrong. Despite not having any real knowledge of your clan's culture and history, if something happens to you both then your clan dies entirely with you, whether it's on the battlefield or due to something like an accident or illness, unless we lock you up and have you breed like a bunch of rabbits. I don't think we're old enough to have kids, Naruto pointed out cautiously. Just throwing it out there. She sighed. Well, I won't keep you longer. But when you get a chance, come back and visit. We can use your help in communicating with them. That way we can learn more about them and your culture all at once. I'll keep it in mind. Jiraiya POV. Jiraiya leaned against a tree beneath the shade as he waited for Naruto to arrive. There was tension lining his frame as he ruminated in silence over what he had learned post-invasion. The old man had intended to make him the next Hokage, explaining that was part of the reason he had him be so visible during the conflict, reminding everyone that the Toad Sage was still there and loyal. Even though he wasn't a fan of the idea, he had to admit that he had the best chance in terms of prospects. The only real issue that could be made against Jiraiya personally would be his writing and peeping habits, things which he had shown he could push aside depending on circumstances. While he wasn't as well known among the younger generation, the older generation that made up the bulk of the more experienced and higher ranks of the shinobi population did know of him, if not personally, then by his deeds. Sanada wasn't qualified at the moment due to a number of issues. Her reputation in terms of gambling alone was detrimental. And, if she had gone years without healing anyone, then chances were that her skills had began degrading. Kakashi was another option. He had loyal service for around 2 decades to the Leaf, an impressive track record, and the respect of most of his peers. While his habit of being late was something widely spread, it never applied in the case of urgent missions. The only real issue was that he was too young and didn't have that much experience in working with the younger generation as a Jonin leader, though Naruto and Sasuke's performance spoke highly of him in that aspect. Danzo, he really wasn't an ideal option during times of peace. Leaving aside his known feats and accomplishments, while active in service, he earned the reputation of being a war hawk. There would be a lot of internal and external issues if he was allowed to take the hat. That didn't change the fact that Jiraiya didn't want the hat. Not unless it was absolutely necessary. But he couldn't make that argument while the old man was still on the mend. It could wait until after they retrieved Sanada and Shizune. His information network had her pegged as entering a casino in Tanzaku not too long ago, accompanied by a young woman with dark hair and a small pig keeping them company. It was a fair distance from the Leaf, but they should be able to get there in ample time with Naruto's masks. Thinking of Naruto, Jiraiya stood up straight off the tree as a black-haired boy passed through the gate. The transformation matched that of the photo just about perfectly. Good. That would make things harder for Akatsuki if they came searching for him, according to the old man anyway. That was another can of worms they'd have to deal with later on. You're the guy who came in on a toad in the woods, Naruto said as he approached, dressed in a tan tunic and beige pants while in disguise. It seems like he took the note about a change in clothes seriously. I didn't know that there was another toad summoner active besides Gamma. Right, he didn't know about the disguise, Jiraiya thought as he rubbed his chin. There really wasn't a point in hiding it anymore, was there? Not now, anyway. That was actually me in disguise. He performed the transformation technique on himself to become Gamma again. Naruto leaned his head back in surprise until Jiraiya dropped the disguise again. Anything you said, while I was like that, I know already. You won't be breaking confidentiality. Okay, but would you hide who you really were? Naruto asked. Because we had to keep things a secret, he said. If Orochimaru knew that I was around, he wouldn't have likely came out of hiding, and chances are he would have changed his plans in a way that would have caused even more deaths and losses. If the old man died because of that, I can't say that things would be as neat as they are without the Hokage, and Karen-chan likely wouldn't be receiving as decent treatment as she is if someone didn't vouch for her. I guess you have a point, Naruto looked down at that, rubbing the back of his head. So, if you were Gamma, and were there all those times? Jiraiya picked up where he was going. Yeah, I know how much she means to you. And, to be honest, she reminds me a little of Kushina. She isn't as much of a spitfire as your mother was growing up, but they have the same smile. And both would go to insane lengths to protect you, he thought to himself. The Toad Sage understood the scope of things as they were now about her. While it was a shame that Orochimaru had gotten his hooks into her in the first place, there was still a chance to save her before he twisted her into someone who couldn't be saved like him. Her actions that day proved that much to him, even if things surrounding her would be a little rough until they settled in the future. Naruto perked up at that. "You really did know my mother too? And your father," he added. "I can't tell you about him under the old man's orders, for now anyway. It'll likely be a distraction for the mission. But sometime after that we'll sit down and have a talk about it, okay?" He nodded enthusiastically. Then, getting formal introductions out of the way, "I'm Jiraiya," he announced. "I'm the former pupil of the third Hokage, Toad Sage, one of the three Sannin, and the sealing expert in charge of the seal your mother left you. I'm usually outside of the village to handle information gathering, but I've popped in a few times to observe you and make sure that the nine-tailed fox didn't have a detrimental effect on your mental health over time, like what happened to that boy from Sand." "Is he doing okay?" Naruto asked abruptly. There's been no mention of him since that fight. Jiraiya supposed it made sense for Naruto to be concerned about the treatment of a fellow Jinchuuriki, even if he had been trying to kill them not too long ago. After they had swooped in and sealed his sand away, storing it in a security scroll and placing it in a secure location far away from where the boy currently was, Jiraiya had to place a number of overlaying seals just to make up for the lack of mental safeguards in the boy's seal. While Kushina worked with Minato to perfect Naruto's seal to a high degree and left a key for him to use if there was a need for it, Gaara of the Desert seal lacked any arrays meant to effectively filter the tailed beast's influence, allowing it to attack his mind to the extent of nearly driving him insane. If anything, the overlays would hopefully make him more compliant as a sort of carrot-and-stick approach to keep him on his best behavior. Whether or not he would regain mental stability without its influence was another question. They really couldn't risk letting someone go inside of his head with the beast within him having as much free reign as it did, but considering what they found out about his past from his sister's mind, he'll probably be better off in the Leaf's custody than in his own village. "He's alive and on the mend," Jiraiya eventually told him. "Maybe when he's in his right mind again, he might be able to enjoy a normal life when things settle down. He probably wouldn't even have that option if you and your friends didn't stop him when you did. Between that and the fact that you're a Chunin now, you've done well for yourself in a very short time. Your parents would be proud." Naruto grinned brightly at that, scratching his cheek nervously. Then, after a moment, he cleared his throat. "So, I went over the mission documents. We're supposed to retrieve 2 women for the old man, right?" Jiraiya nodded. "They're both Leaf shinobi who have been out of action for some time now. With the invasion over, we're working on pulling in assets from all over the different nations that aren't active to handle some of the workload. They're both extremely skilled in medical techniques, but we'll have to travel far and fast to get to them before they leave the last place they've been spotted. If they can help the injured people, and Karen-chan too, then we should hurry," Naruto said, pulling out the bird mask. "Suzaku's recovered from that day and should be able to carry us far enough if I don't need to do any fighting." A shrill cry was loosed as the vermilion and gold-adorned bird came into existence once more. Jiraiya mounted it with his young charge at the helm, and they took flight through the air towards where his information network last spotted the two. He wasn't expecting trouble, minus some resistance from Tsunade, but they would be able to manage if it did crop up. Orochimaru Base. Kabuto stood over the prone form of his master's so-called elites, adjusting his glasses as he observed their efficiently battered and broken bodies. The Sound Four, as they were to be known, had to be punished for both their failure to keep Lord Orochimaru safe and their musings on fleeing the ranks of Sound. Thus it fell on him to do so, now that he'd recovered from the corrosive influence of Naruto's nine-tailed chakra. He had been careful not to do anything lethal, if only because they were still useful. But their blood painted the hard floor beneath his sandals to the extent that sanitizing it would be a necessity after he had finished up. "Now, have you all calmed yourselves down?" Ngh Tayuya struggled to look up at him from the floor, the tendons her legs severed in a way that he could later put back into place. Her flute lay abandoned on the ground, in the opposite direction. What's the damn point in sticking around when his soul burned to ashes? He's beyond dead and gone. While this wouldn't be an issue had you been more attentive in your duties, Lord Orochimaru did have a backup plan should the invasion end in such a sorry state, Kabuto told her, and by extension the rest of them. As his right hand, it falls on me to fulfill this task, but I can't have my efforts hindered by all of the infighting around the land of Sound, thanks to the rumors of his demise being so widespread. That was the unfortunate problem when you gathered your forces by sheer power and charisma. The moment that you were weak or disposed of, the foundation you built your power upon fragmented and collapsed in on itself. Now the Land of Sound had several different factions, all once under Lord Orochimaru's banner, starting to turn upon one another using resources and assets that weren't theirs. That just wouldn't do. As you can imagine, Lord Orochimaru will be displeased when he returns to find things in such disarray. To that end, I'm tasking you four with corralling these rogue elements while I focus on his return. Succeed and your failure may be overlooked. And if we fail, you'll kill us, Kidomaru guessed. That about right? Oh no, killing you would be a waste of research materials. He smirked. I'll dispatch Kimi Maro to bring you to me alive. You'll wish for death soon enough afterwards, I promise. They stiffened upon hearing that. It was true that Kimi Maro may not be in the best of health, but he was the loyalist and strongest agent of Orochimaru next to Kabuto himself at present. And he'd be more than willing to drag them back. Minus arms and legs. So, I take it, you know what, you'll cooperate without the need for further convincing. They agreed wisely. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25. Itachi walked through the woodlands, closing in on the hidden leaf, with his partner in tow. The orders from Pain had come in to find out the status of the Jinchuriki in the wake of the failed invasion. There had been no sign of the one-tailed raccoon dog's container since then, at least not from the stray sand shinobi they questioned not too long ago. To that end, he and Kasama had been chosen to carry out the mission due to his knowledge of the terrain and abilities being better suited to investigation. That was for the best. He knew of the patrol route and could avoid any unnecessary encounters that would alarm the general shinobi population. He glanced under the brim of his hat to his partner. It had been some time since Kasama had the chance to exercise his more violent tendencies, so he was itchy to act upon them. The rogue Uchiha hoped that he could control him, but he was still far more manageable than most of the others in the organization. As they grew closer to the wall bordering the village, Itachi stopped and made a set of hand seals. The earth opened up like a parting maw as chakra shifted the dirt beneath it to create a path for them to take, under the ground, and into the leaf. While the detection system acted as a sphere rather than a dome and would pick it up if anyone else tried, he could get by it without any trouble and avoid alarming anyone. Once they'd cleared the underground path and created an opening in an out-of-the-way spot, Itachi used a genjutsu to cover it up. Then he and Kasama layered a transformation upon themselves, leaving his living blade wrapped in cloth to appear as a pair of laborers. There were plenty going around with all of the rebuilding going on from the damage done by the giant summonings rampaging around. The ground was cracked with fissures running up and down from deep depressions. Buildings as far as the eye could see were in the process of being rebuilt, men walking around in tanned and plain clothes while carrying supplies and building materials. It was somewhat disheartening to see his old home in such a state, but the circumstances could have been far, far worse. So how we doing this? Kasama asked. His chosen transformation had left his skin pale in tone with black hair that spiked upwards. We find some Anbu and make them talk? That's always fun. But not necessary, Itachi said as he activated his Sharingan behind the cover of his transformation, making it seem as though he was looking through a tinted lens. I remember several of the identities of those among their rank from my time on active duty. Given the scope of what has happened, all of them will likely have the answers we're looking for. I just need to make eye contact, and I can get the information without needing to shed blood. The truth was a bit more complicated than that. The Hokage had a plan, so to speak. With the aid of a Yamanaka, they could be made to hold information, to be given to him, and, by extension, Pain. This allowed them to control what information got leaked to Akatsuki. Feh. That's boring, Kasama whined. But he followed behind him as they walked through the streets until Itachi spotted the plant agent, an off-duty man sitting in a food vendor while eating alone. They entered and placed an order, with Itachi using his Sharingan to make the chef tune out and ignore the three of them after placing their order, while he enthralled the man to have him spill classified information. Kasama listened impassively while savoring his takoyaki made of imported ectopi as the pair spoke in a muted tone. The man revealed the one-tailed Jinchuriki had been captured after its defeat by the nine-tailed Jinchuriki, placed in a private facility under heavy guard, and there were no plans to execute him at the moment. As far as Kasama would know, it was all the man had to offer as he had seen Itachi do the same thing numerous times. Once Itachi finished retrieving the information, he planted a suggestion for the man to depart in a hurry. This left the two alone to eat in peace as they contemplated what action to take next with the information. Any idea which place they're holding him? His partner asked. Itachi nodded his head slightly. I can think of a few locations. But we'd never be able to infiltrate them without causing a pandemonium. In a best-case scenario, they'd move him while we were bogged down fighting. For now, we should simply take the information we have and get it to Pain as quickly as possible." Any further conversation died when two Jonin walked in that he recognized Kurenai Yuuhi and Asuma Saratobi. It seemed like they were meeting alone as they took a seat next to one another at the stall and placed their own orders. This could prove troublesome, Itachi thought to himself as Kasama spared them the occasional glance to size them up. The chef was still under a command to ignore Kasama and Itachi, which the woman was likely to notice in enough time given her reputation. Any effort on his part to change that would probably alert them faster. And then, to make his life more complicated, Kakashi Hataka walked in and took a seat next to them. From the conversation that sprung up, it seemed like he was thanking the woman for her efforts in tutoring his student before the exams. When she inquired about the girl's health, he said she doesn't remember much of that day from head trauma, but Sasuke was filling her in on the details and would actually be meeting him there to discuss a training regimen. That gave Itachi a minor compulsion to want to stay and listen in on his little brother's progress and growth. While he personally approved of allowing Kakashi to be Sasuke's teacher, he still couldn't help but wonder how his growth was going beyond the occasional reports from the Hokage. But no, they needed to leave while they could. "Let's get back to work," he said, standing from his seat. The act grabbed the three-leaf shinobi's attention for a moment, but they seemingly brushed it off as the second laborer shoved the rest of his takoyaki on a stick into his mouth and then followed him out. No sooner than they were halfway back to the opening he created did the world around them swirl. They soon found themselves bound by thick tree roots the size of anacondas. Itachi only let loose a soft sigh. "Busted, huh?" Kasama chuckled as he glanced over to Itachi, ignoring the woman appearing from the tree roots with a kunai in her hand. "So much for that plan, eh?" Itachi said nothing as he dispelled the illusion placed upon them. The moment it vanished, they found themselves surrounded on three sides by Kakashi, Kurenai, and Asuma. "So much for getting in and out without a fight now," he supposed. "So what gave us away?" Kasama asked as he rubbed his nose while still under the transformation technique. A grin stretched across his face as he did so. Asuma spat out his cigarette and crushed it beneath his combat sandals as he reached for his weapons. Next to the Chunin exams, a reconstruction period is when a village is most vulnerable to infiltration, since there's an influx of supplies and outside hands to deal with the repairs. Yet, for laborers, your hands are remarkably uncalloused. Not to mention most have the same break period and don't leave the food vendors outside their work area. But the tools on your belts are better suited for stonework and masonry. That group has already had their break hours ago, and woodworking is being done around this area, Kurenai noted. "The fact that you placed a genjutsu on the chef to ignore your presence was something I couldn't help but notice as you left as well. And breaking out of that genjutsu so easily all but confirms it," Kakashi finished, rounding out the three. "I've already sent for Anbo with a shadow clone, so how about you drop the disguises and surrender peacefully? Damn their perceptiveness," Itachi thought as he went ahead and dropped his transformation. He hated the thought of having to cripple the Leaf's forces further after the invasion, but he had to keep his cover in the organization intact. That meant dealing with this efficiently. "Let's not waste time then, Kasama." Shizune POV. Shizune hummed softly as she watched Taunton nibble on her lunch. It was midday and her mistress had gotten herself drunk as usual the night before. There was no doubt that once her deep slumber ended when evening came around, she would likely be in need of something for her hangover. Looking at Taunton left her deep in thought. How long had she been away from the Leaf now, keeping an eye on the woman that her uncle had fallen for? How long had the strong Sannin that she had followed out on her sabbatical been wandering around aimlessly to forget the pain of her past and losses? Her musings were interrupted when Taunton suddenly lifted her head and wiggled her snout towards the door. Someone was coming then. While Shizune was wishing that it was just someone passing by, she didn't have high hopes of that. Several experiences in the past, dealing with those who her lady had some outstanding debts with and came to collect, had taught her better over the years. "Is it another debt collector?" she asked. Taunton shook her head. "Buhi. Not one of the ones they'd met so far," Shizune translated. "Do you smell anything else familiar about them?" A nod this time. "Boo Buhi. A toad?" That brought to mind the missive that they received some time back from the Leaf. While she had only met Lord Jiraiya a few times, she knew that he definitely had that scent on him a great deal of the time. Her lady had made jokes about it sometimes while inebriated. It was likely him, and, as she was affiliated with the Leaf, she should hear him out. Not to mention that, if he was coming personally then they probably wanted them to return to the village. But her lady wouldn't likely be willing to deal with him so soon. In fact, she'd been very vocal about what to do if someone from the Leaf came while she was out cold. Either drive them off or run away, even if she had to cart her off in a drunken stupor. Since she couldn't drive off someone of his level, nor wanted to risk it and defend him, she opted for the latter option. Shiznit opened the window to get ready to do just that when she found the toad sage there already. He was sitting cross-legged on the wall, defying gravity with a smile on his face. There was no scent coming off of him. "It's not nice to try and run, Shiznit-chan," he said calmly. "Jiraiya-sama," she backed away a few steps as he climbed inside of the room. "If you're here, then who is it that Taunton smelled?" No sooner than she asked did a storage tag slip under the door and then released its contents. A blonde boy popped out and looked around the room until he saw the toad sage and then opened it. There was a black-haired boy with a toad on his head waiting, who stepped inside as the blonde one vanished in a puff of smoke. "Told you it'd work," he said to the older shinobi as he picked up the tag. "Pay up." Yeah, just get back to the room and start working on those balloons," said the toad sage as he closed the window. The boy grumbled under his breath and then left out. Lord Jiraiya then turned back to her. "It's been a while since I've seen you, Shiznit-chan. You've gotten bigger." She inclined her head low at the man, having been caught trying to run away. It was technically an act of treason. "I'm sorry. I'll accept whatever punishment you want to give me. I expected Princess would have given you instructions to fly the coop if I came sniffing around, and the old man hasn't made it an official request yet, so there's no harm done." He looked over to Tsunada's inelegant sleeping form. "How's she doing?" "About the same as the last time we met," she admitted. The death of her uncle and her lady's brother had rendered the woman on a self-destructive path, slow suicide in all but name. By going with her and caring for her, Shizuna hoped that she could at least slow her degradation to an extent. He must have understood that too, because he set a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Thanks for looking after the princess all of this time for us. It couldn't have been easy, and you shouldn't have had to spend so many years of your childhood doing so alone." "It hasn't been a burden," she told him in a voice that was soft, yet honest. "There's nothing I would have rather been doing, and I've learned a lot, so it hasn't been a waste. She just wanted to see to it that her lady returned to how she was before." Shizuna just wanted to see her happy again, like Tsunada had been when her uncle was around. If keeping her company meant that she could see her smiling again and happy, then the years spent wouldn't matter, whether it was another year from now or 10. "Me too, Shiznit-chan," the toad sage said as he took a seat near where she had been. "Me and the old man want nothing more than that after everything's been said and done these last few weeks. That's why I'm here now. So they have come to bring us back," she figured. "Can it wait until she wakes up? She's had a long day." "Sure," he said. "I'll fill you in on what's been happening in the village until now, while we wait." Itachi POV. "Well, that turned out more fun than I thought," Kasama said with his trademark grin as they stood within the confines of an alley. They were in a nearby town, having escaped the village and the pursuing Anbu officers. Well, not so much escape as Kasama had all but sheared through enough of their numbers that they called the chase off after they were a good distance from the village. He'd also nearly disemboweled the Hokage's son before Might Guy had shown up, but the man had been lucky all the things considered. He could at least be brought back into fighting form with a short period of recovery and minor skin grafting. As for Kakashi and Kurenai, Itachi did say they were pressed for time. Hopefully a few Yamanaka and medic nin could deal with the mental trauma of his Tsukiyomi being forced upon them. If not, then they were just unfortunate casualties, and it was an unfortunate means to an end. "We shouldn't linger," Itachi said. "Even if they've withdrawn to tend to their wounded and dead, it'll be a matter of time before they send someone more specialized to pursue us." They were getting ready to press onwards when they heard someone stop at the mouth of the alley they were in. Itachi had gone out of his way to hastily layer it with an external genjutsu to give it the illusion of being empty while they readied new transformation disguises. Such a thing was easily peered through by the pair of crimson eyes that stared straight at him. "It's been a long time, Sasuke," Itachi said, devoid of all emotion as he stared at his brother. He'd gotten much bigger since the time he spent chasing after him when they were younger. "Itachi." Sasuke hissed, the word dripping with venom as it left his mouth. The Sharingan, Kusama seemed slightly intrigued as he turned back to Itachi. I thought you'd killed off your entire clan. He wasn't worth mentioning or killing, Itachi said to that. The cold words only served to stir his brother's anger further until his left hand became alight with blue lightning that chirped like 1,000 angry birds, drawing even more attention. So he taught him the Chidori. His naive little brother rushed straight ahead to impale him with it. Die. Itachi felt immensely disappointed. As if something so blatant would work on anyone of his skill level. He caught the assailing hand at the wrist and then drove his knee into Sasuke's abdomen hard enough to knock the breath out of him. The effect was twofold in the end. It forced Sasuke to drop the technique, unable to concentrate from the sudden pain spiking through him. And it dropped him to his knees while his wrist was still in Itachi's grasp, on the verge of vomiting. Itachi then hefted him into the air by his wrist. If he was this weak yet brash enough to leave the village to chase after him, then it was only a matter of time before Sasuke got himself killed. If this is the extent of your power after this long, your hatred hasn't tempered you enough. Perhaps you need a reminder of that day? Itachi's Sharingan morphed into its kaleidoscopic form, and true fear entered Sasuke's eyes. He knew what was coming, and nothing could stop it. The brief scream for him not do it again died as Sasuke's mind was subjected to 24-hour within his Tsukuyomi and his body went limp. Seeing his eyes were half-lidded and the crimson hue of his Sharingan had faded, Itachi dropped him like that. Sasuke had his headband, so when someone saw him, they'd notify the proper authorities and see him back into the leaf scare. The rogue Uchiha then turned back to his partner. Let's go, Kusama. You just gonna leave him like this? He asked. It'd be better to kill him now, before he gets in the way again. I need him alive, Itachi said. You've noticed my eyesight deteriorating. He did. I wasn't going to say anything if you weren't. His hatred of me will eventually drive him to become stronger, and to do so he will need to create bonds with his teammates, such as the nature of the Hidden Leaf's method of training, the fostering of cooperation. When those bonds mature, I'll return to sever them and make him watch. The grief of loss will cause his eyes will flourish up to the point they reach the same level of my own, at which point I will claim them for myself and become able to see once more. Damn, that's cold, Kusama said with a note of mirth in his voice as Itachi walked past him towards the mouth of the alley. I'd just kill someone if I needed to, but you want him to get stronger through grief just so you can crush him and take his eyes out their sockets? Honestly, I kinda feel bad for the kid. Neither one was aware that, clinging to the fringes of his consciousness, Sasuke heard every word of what his brother said. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26. You have my sincerest apologies that I could not be there to protect you, Rock Lee told Sakura as they sat outside the hospital. It had been an obvious target during the attack, so they had Anbu dedicated to protecting it. However, one sound shinobi had slipped through the net while the toads dealt with the snakes that sought it out. Lee had gotten himself involved, worsening his injuries in the process. It left him confined to a wheelchair and with his arm in a cast. The medics had been clear that doing that one more time would leave them both permanently disabled. He'd likely never use them again for ordinary life, let alone being a shinobi. It's fine, Lee, Sakura said, peeling an apple for him. It happened so suddenly that no one was prepared. Besides, apparently I took care of myself this time. In truth, she didn't remember much of what happened that day after the invasion had started because of the hit to her head. Naruto had regaled her with how great a job she did, while Sasuke personally told her she was useful after they'd healed his physical injuries and told him to take it easy until his chakra system corrected itself. That was as high of a compliment she was going to get from him, given his personality. Lee's eyes drifted down to his arm and wheelchair. Even so, I hate that I was not able to participate more. It is a feeling that troubles me like no other, knowing that others are doing everything they can while I can do nothing, she finished for him in her thoughts. She didn't dare say it out loud because there was nothing more painful than having someone else pointing that out to them. Being told how useless she was by that Kunoichi during the Forest of Death, after Lee and the others got hurt defending her, had been the moment she decided to take steps to rectify that. But Lee didn't have that option. His injuries meant that even work in the reserves was unlikely. The Lee clan wasn't very big, but the majority of the men had some role in the shinobi forces. He was likely the first one born with his inability to shape chakra properly and struggled so hard to make it as far as he had, only for him to be nearly crippled. That probably made Lee feel like even more of a failure. Sakura could do nothing to help him as things stood. Not even as his dreams were being crushed before her eyes. She couldn't help the others in the forest of death before, and, while she finally became capable of doing so for them during the invasion, there was nothing she could do for Lee now. It left her with a bitter feeling in her chest that quickly grew unbearable as she laid the peeled apple and knife down. "I'm going to go get something to drink," Sakura said, rising from her seat. "Do you want anything in particular?" "No thank you," Lee said. His eyes remained downcast as he reached for the apple with his good hand. Sakura pursed her lips and then walked off. Traversing the hospital corridor, the Kunoichi found herself wondering how many were like Lee. How many were so crippled during the invasion that they could never again fight after spending years working towards it. She wondered how badly her teammates would take it if they ended up in such a state, incapable of pursuing their dreams. Naruto would be completely lost without the chance of becoming the Hokage, leaving him gloomy and his goofy smile never to be seen again. Sasuke, well, she couldn't even imagine how badly that would hurt him. It was a miracle that they managed to come out so well from what she had been told secondhand. The only lasting injury was that she lost her memories of most of that day, and that was a best-case scenario. It could have been so much worse. That thought was only made more abundant as the medics rushed a gurney down the corridor. She spotted the familiar hair and facial features of the patient being carted off to a room. The words came out in a low, faint-hearted voice. "Sasuke?" Sonata POV. An unfeminine groan left Sonata's lips as she stirred awake. The familiar, unwelcomed acquaintance that was a hangover headache immediately made itself known. It pounded at her skull like it was trying to hammer it open, telling her she knew that it was coming when she downed that last bottle. Her entire body hurt with a throbbing ache that covered every inch. Her tongue and throat were dry, painfully so. She caught the scent of alcohol wafting from her pores, and it only served to make her stomach curl from the abuse she put it through the night before. Even for her, it would take time to treat, purging the toxins, soothing the muscles, reinvigorating her body. And she could only do that once she was able to concentrate again, something that would be immensely easier if her head wasn't trying to crack itself open. She made a low, indecipherable noise that her apprentice should recognize well enough to act on. Sure enough, a wet and cold glass was pressed against her cheek. She grabbed it and sat up slowly with her eyes closed, finding the rim of the glass with her lips instead. The fizzling liquid within tickled as it went down her throat and she sighed. Shizuna's special blend would work miracles in minutes to get rid of her headache. After that she could deal with her aches and pains. Then they would go get something to eat before hitting the parlors. "Feel better?" asked a masculine voice. Her blood froze when she recognized it. Sonata forced her eyes open, briefly catching his figure and features before they felt like they were going to pop out of her head from a stab of pain. She covered them with one hand and used the other to make sure the bed sheet covered her body up to her neck. "What happened to Shizuna?" "I sent her off to babysit for a bit since I wanted to have a word with you." Even with her eyes closed, she could feel the weight of his eyes staring at her body as he spoke. "Though, I admit that I did want a chance to see you in person since it's been a few years now. You're still as beautiful as always, princess. Only you would be interested in seeing a woman in this state," she said, with a note of displeasure in her voice. At least the drink was working well enough that her headache was fading fast. "What do you want, Jiraiya?" "The old man sent me after what happened to the last guy who tried to get a message across to you. I thought that would make it clear that I didn't want to talk to anyone from the Leaf." She opened her eyes a bit to test if the pain was still there. It was tolerable. Apparently the message didn't reach. Jiraiya sighed, rubbing the bridge between his eyes. "Princess, have you really not been keeping up with events there?" "Why would I?" she asked. "I want nothing to do with the village." The Leaf was invaded during the Chunin exams by Orochimaru, his village, and Sand, he said in a slightly lower tone, eyes fixed on her in a focused stare. They even went so far as to bring their Jinchuriki, who went into a full-on tailed beast state. A single simple question was her response to that. "How many died?" "Not as many as it could have been," he said. "I was there with the old man. He managed to get the killing blow, but it cost him an arm in exchange. It looked to be a clean cut by Orochimaru's sword, but the reattachment wasn't as good as it could have been. The arm doesn't work as well as before. The snake got that blade from Ryuchi Cave, didn't he?" She fought off a yawn as the remnants of her headache faded enough to begin sorting out the rest of her body. A pale, thin, green glow swaddled her body as she continued. A legendary weapon from one of the three Sage regions wouldn't stop at simple damage, so you should have had them checked down to the microscopic level. There's probably cellular and nervous system damage that should have been sorted out before reattachment. He drew up into himself, crossing his arms. We couldn't risk him bleeding out before then. The medics did the best that they could at the time, and it saved his life. Sanada rolled her eyes and scoffed. And I'm assuming the village is still standing? His long, white hair shifted as he nodded his head. Luckily, the one-tailed raccoon dog was successfully fought and captured by a group of really talented genin. She gave him a flat look, clearly unamused by the perceived joke. It's the truth. His lips curled into a small proud smile. I gave Minato's boy the toad summoning contract and he used it to call up Gamabunta when they were in the forest. The resulting battle pretty much leveled the area, but, in the end, he and his friends managed to knock out the host by the time we got there. Well, as riveting as that information is, it doesn't explain why you've come for me. The healing glow flared a bit as she looked him in the eyes. Again, what do you want, Jiraiya? I'm here to bring you back, he said firmly. Officially, the old man is only calling Shizuna back, but we both know that he wants you back too, and it's only a formality to keep things quiet. Sanada's eyes narrowed. And if I refuse? Then the next time it's Anbu and myself, he told her bluntly. After the invasion, the old man can't keep turning a blind eye to everything you've done and the reputation you've built up. And we all know that if you run, Shizuna will go with you because she's given up her youth to see to it that you're not alone. As callous as you are to the thought of going back to the village, I know that you wouldn't turn Dan's niece a try. In a single, swift motion, she moved to cut him off. Strong slender fingers grabbed him by the collar and then hoisted him in the air with his back against a wall. Never bring him up again. Undeterred from her glare and posture, he reached up and wrapped his fingers around her wrists. The touch was surprisingly gentle, all things considered. You can't keep running from the ghosts of your past, princess. No matter how hard you drink or how far you go, they'll never stop chasing you. You've had years to figure that out. Why now? Sanada demanded to know. You know how much it hurts, both you and him. So why, after all these years, are you dragging me back to the same place that you're running from? He frowned. I'm not running from anything. With Sensei injured and my reputation in the toilet, I'm betting you're the last viable candidate for the title of Hokage, right? She asked. What excuse are you going to use to run away from it now that Orochimaru is gone? Her question was met with a looming silence as neither one spoke. Her arms grew slack, and she lowered him down, their eyes locked. We're the same, Jiraiya. You lost those kids in AIM and your apprentice. I lost my family and the love of my life. You throw yourself into your work to forget about them, and I drink until the pain goes away. So you, of all people, should know what it means for me to go back. The old man knows he doesn't have more than a few years left in him and wants to help you before he takes his final rest, he finally said after a long pause to gather his thoughts. And I tried to give you space since I couldn't do or say anything to help you get over it, but now neither of us has an excuse anymore to keep running. It's time to go back home. Sanada scoffed. She didn't believe they could help, nor did she want their help after all this time. But she didn't delude herself into thinking that she could elude Anbu forever, especially not when Shizuna would follow her and slow her down. The life of a missing nin was hard. Taking refuge in another major village would lead to more bloodshed on her shoulders. And the fact that she was afraid of blood would render her worth little to nothing as a medic, advice and counsel could only go so far without the ability to demonstrate. And then there was Jiraiya. He would come after her if she did that to Shizuna. He would follow her footsteps with the same relentless zeal he spent hunting down Orochimaru. It wasn't worth it. I don't want to be seen in public, she said. People will have expectations and I don't feel like dealing with them. The old man expected that. We've got it covered. Then get out so I can change, she ordered. When he quirked an eye, she crossed her arms. If I was going to run, I'd let you stay so I'd have an excuse to deck you into the next town over. Just wait outside until I've had a chance to clean myself up. Naruto POV. Naruto grumbled in frustration, eyes squinted as he spun the water inside of the balloon resting between his palms. His frustration only mounted as the balloon simply shifted with the chakra rather than break. This is impossible. Naruto-kun, called the tall, dark-haired woman that sat across the table from him. So far she had been nice to him, only asking him the occasional question of what living in the village was like since she had been gone for years. In one of her hands was a slice of fruit that she fed to her pet pig, which sat in her lap. "What are you doing?" "The toad guide told me that if I managed to get the water to spin and pop the balloon, I'd learn a technique from the fourth Hokage," he explained. "But when I make it spin, all it does is just stretch the balloon out like it's trying to become flatter." "I see." She tapped her chin in thought for a moment. "The water is being used as a medium to help you pop the exterior. But that won't work if you keep doing it like that." His head snapped up towards her at that. "Why not?" "Because the flow is too stable." She picked up an empty balloon that had yet to be filled and stretched it. "The exterior of the balloon is flexible to a certain degree, so it can withstand stretching as long as the flow is stable and moves along a set path. You would have to stretch it far beyond the elasticity of the material in order to break it that way." "But that's not how he did it," Naruto said with a frown. "His got all lumpy and then popped. I suppose he might have destabilized the flow of chakra to make it more violent." She reached across the table, pressed a finger to his forehead, and closed her eyes. "The flow of chakra circulating in your body is spinning clockwise, so you can try to force it rotate counterclockwise inside the balloon, and that should make it less stable." He nodded his head and then gave it a try. The balloon began to shake again, jostling a bit more unstably and threatening to jump out of his hand. "That's better, but it wasn't enough to pop it." She extended her hands and cupped the top and bottom of the balloon between her palms. "I'll hold it steady this time. You just focus on spinning it as violently as you can." He closed his eyes and focused on doing so, injecting his chakra in from both hands, holding onto the sides of it. The chakra flowed out and mingled with the water as it churned in place. The faster he rotated it, the more it struggled to remain in her palms and pushed against their hands from multiple points, like a cricket in a cage, bouncing around and trying to get out. A thought occurred. What if he could make more crickets, more points where his chakra pushed against the balloon it was trapped within? "I think I have an idea, but I need to be able to move my palms around." Shizuna let go and then stood up to walk away with Tauntaun, taking a seat on the windowsill. "If you're that sure of yourself, then we'll keep our distance. We don't want to get wet." With them out of the splash zone, he held the balloon with one hand and began to channel the chakra within it with that hand. Then he brought his palm across the top with the other, moving it at angles while manipulating the chakra within. He made it sharper, transitioning from smooth motions to quick grazes with his palm hovered just over the surface as he speared it across. The still flowing chakra bent and pulled more violently as he went faster and came from different directions. It was like multiple crickets were bouncing around inside of the stretching sphere, forcing the elasticity in multiple points rather than a set one. He wove it further, forcing his chakra to spin in multiple directions as fast and hard as he could until the balloon ruptured and splashed water all over his face and table. "I did it," he exclaimed, uncaring of the fact that his face was wet and the upper portion of his shirt was soaked. "Congratulations," Shizuna said with a small applause, causing him to grin. "You might want to towel off though. You'll catch a cold otherwise." Naruto chuckled for a bit until the door opened. Jiraiya walked in with the woman he saw sleeping on the bed. She looked down at Naruto for a moment longer than a passing glance before she turned her attention to her apprentice. "Pack your things, Shizune," she ordered. "We're going back to the village." The dark-haired woman shot up from her perch with the tiny pig. "Really?" She nodded. "Let's go see the old man." End of chapter 26.